Now, we were going to go through again, and I believe we were on page 14 to go through. And we began with the line, here with the suddenness, here with the suddenness divine advents have, repeating the marvel of the first descent, changing to rapture the dull earthly round. Love came to her, hiding the shadow death. Well might he find in her his perfect shrine. Since first the earth being's heavenward growth began, through all the long ordeal of the race, never a rarer creature bore his shaft. That burning test of the Godhead in our parts, a lightning from the heights on our abyss, all in her pointed to a nobler kind, near to earth's wideness, intimate with heaven, exalted and swift, her young, large-visioned spirit, voyaging through worlds of splendor and of calm, overflew the ways of thought to unborn things. So we see, going as deeply as we can, that this divine event that is so sudden. I once asked Madhav Pandit, and I said, well, you know, we aspire, and there's an evolution. He said, yes, but prior to every evolution, there is an involution. And this is what has happened here. Love has come down again, repeating the marvel of the first descent, and he finds in Savitri his perfect shrine, because no one else has ever been capable of holding divine love. We carry in ourselves small bits and pieces of it, and there are perhaps moments when the inner lamps are lit that we have a glimpse or a feeling of this divine love. But only in Savitri has he found his own eternity. And then we have the lines, ardent was her self-poised, unstumbling will. Well, that's quite a line, because ardent, and then self-poised, and then unstumbling. All these examples of Savitri's will. And in the next line, her mind is a sea of white sincerity that's passionate in flow and had not one turbid wave. And then begins the passage that we spoke of at great length last time. And I'll ask one of the new people to read it, and then we'll go through it again a little more deeply. So as in a mystic and dynamic dance, anyone can begin. I think some of you new people would like to read.
May I read?
Yes, surely.
As in a mystic and dynamic dance, a priestess of immaculate ecstasies, inspired and ruled from truth's revealing vault, moves in some prophet cavern of the gods, a heart of silence in the hands of joy, inhabited with rich, creative beats, a body like a parable of dawn that seemed a niche for veiled divinity a golden temple door to things beyond.
Very good. You read quite well. The words and the lines. Inhabited, it's not inhabited, but inhabited. So the accent is on the H, inhabited. And the only other thing I would suggest is perhaps you could try to reveal a little more of the music in each line. When we say a heart of silence in the hands of joy, inhabited with rich, creative beats, a body like a parable of dawn that seemed a niche for veiled divinity, or golden temple door to things beyond. Well, let's begin with mystic and dynamic dance. You know, the priestesses of the old time are portrayed often seated on a tripod seat, but often dancing also. And Sri Aurobindo uses this, and it's a very Indian image also, because the dance is so significant of the inner life in India. So Savitri is a priestess of these ecstasies, which are so immaculate. And he uses as if, of course, we've talked about that very often, as if in a mystic and dynamic dance, this priestess who is inspired and ruled from the revealing vault of truth moves in some prophet cavern of the gods. So here we have again the cavern in which the priestess is moving. And then he begins to speak of her form. She has a heart of silence in the hands of joy. So he brings it forward for us so beautifully that inhabited with rich creative beats. That line was not in the earlier books. It was found in the latest edition. And it's a beautiful line because that heart is inhabited with rich creative beats, not our ordinary physical beats, but these beats of her heart can create worlds. And yet the heart is silence. It's a heart of silence in the hands of joy. Then her body is like a parable of dawn. All through the ages, even in the West, in Christianity, the great ones have had to talk to us about parables and how the world was created. Mother does it also, speaking of these four emanations that she put forward. So Savitri's body is like a parable of dawn, of the beginning. And that body seemed a niche for veiled divinity. He says it seemed a niche for veiled divinity, or a golden temple door to things beyond. And then there's a period. So her body itself is like divinity that is veiled. And none of us could really see Mother. I remember that once one of the great sadhaks told me, we don't see Sri Aurobindo, he sees us. And it was that way with Mother. She could look into our being and she could see everything in us, our past, our present, and our future possibilities. She even told me that when I met with her that first hour that we spent together in 1961. And she spoke of what had to be done. And it's personal, so I won't go into it, but let us continue with her time-born steps, in which swayed immortal rhythms. And even her look and her smile awoke celestial sense, even in earth stuff. And we are the earth stuff, let us be honest, that most of us, when we saw her, if we were even the slightest bit open, it awoke celestial sense. It was a heavenly experience. And the intense delight of that moment just poured a supernal beauty upon us. It was so extraordinary to feel that delight, which would usually bring about the psychic tears. I know it did for me, and it did for so many I've spoken to. We couldn't hold it very long. We had to fall down at her feet and just weep. So now we have a wide self-giving that is native to her, as well as a magnanimity as of sea or sky. Look how vast Mother was. When I had an experience of her in her new body, I saw that she could be everywhere at once because she was no longer limited to the physical frame. And of course, in the physical frame, she had to deal with all the problems of the world, as did Sri Aurobindo. He once writes to Amal, Savitri, there is no time for that now, because he had World War II to make the decisive moves so that the Nazis would be conquered. So she did envelop us with a greatness, and she still does, because we can contact her now more easily than having to wait for 200 people to go to her room and she gets her breakfast or her dinner at 2 a.m. Her kindly care was a sweet, temperate son. And I think I've told some of you previously that sweet, and especially sweetness, was Sri Aurobindo's favorite word. And it was Shakespeare's as well. Her high passion was a blue heaven's equipoise. And then Sri Aurobindo takes us into our humanity. And he says, as might a soul fly like a hunted bird, and that soul is escaping with tired wings from a world of storms, and a quiet reach like a remembered breast. In a haven of safety and splendid soft repose, one could drink life back in streams of honey fire. We really need to feel that now, in this time of one more crisis. And I read last week on my weekly reading during the COVID-19 what my beloved Upaguru Aurobindo Basu said to me. He said, there will be many, many more disasters because the supramental will no longer accept this mental way of life. And so in these times of disaster, this is when we have to drink back life in these streams of honey fire and recover the lost habit of happiness. Many of us have recovered this already because we belong to them. And if we did not belong to them, we would be like the 7,500 cases in one day in Florida. We could feel her bright nature's glorious ambience. We could preen joy in her warmth and colors rule. Everything about this passage is all that Mother can do and is doing for us, because her deep of compassion and this hushed sanctuary. You know, when we came in and she would greet us with a great bonjour, then after that, there could be many moments of this hushed sanctuary. And you could feel her inward help opening something in you. I cannot say in me that it was a gate in heaven that opened, but certainly she opened much. And love in her was wider than the universe. Then we go back again to the God love, who found his home in her, and that the whole world could take refuge in her single heart. And it back to the Godhead of love. The great unsatisfied Godhead here could dwell. Well, he's unsatisfied because he's not fulfilled on earth. And most of the time, the love that we see here is either darkly vital or purely dark and cold love. The word has become so bastardized that people tend not to even use it any longer. So Savitri is vacant, empty of the dwarf self's imprisoned air, which all of us can admit to. Therefore, her mood could harbor his sublimer breath. That is spiritual, and it has the power to make all things divine. And then, of course, for even her gulfs were secrecies of light. At once, she was the stillness and the word. I believe I talked about this last time a little bit, but at one time, Mother went to Sri Aurobindo, and she says, I have the power of the word. The power of the word is the power to create anything. It is such a power that one can't even imagine what she could have done. And Sri Aurobindo said to her, oh yes, and you will become a great teacher, and you will be revered above all the great sages and seers of the world. But we don't want this. We want the supramental. And Mother gave it up immediately. And he says he had never met anyone like Mother who could surrender so perfectly. So love meets her. He finds a vastness like his own. He refines his warm, subtle ether, and he moves in the Mother as in his natural home. And in her, he met his own eternity. Shall we then carry on a bit, because we have lots of time and each one of you could read something. So let us begin. Vladimir, you can start, and then we'll go to Edith and continue.
Till then, no mournful line had barred this ray. On the frail breast of this precarious earth, since her orbed sight in its breath-fastened house, opening in sympathy with happier stars, where life is not exposed to sorrowful change. Remembered beauty, death claimed lids ignore, and wondered at this world of fragile forms, carried on canvas stripes of shimmering time, the impunity of unborn mites was hers.
Okay, so we should go through this. Now, it's canvas strips.
Sorry, yes.
Strips of canvas.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was another one, orbed sight. He's speaking of her eyes. Since her orbed sight.
Or orbed, yes, right.
In its breath-fastened house. So we can continue on and then we'll discuss it a little bit. Next verse.
Although she leaned to bear the human load, her walk kept still the measures of the gods. Earth's breath had failed to stain that brilliant glass, unsmeared with the dust of our mortal atmosphere. It still reflected heaven's spiritual joy.
Next person.
Although she leaned to bear the human load, her walk kept still the measures of the gods. Earth's breath had failed to stain that brilliant glass, unsmeared with the dust of our mortal atmosphere. It still reflected heaven's spiritual joy.
Next person.
Saw who lived within her light, her playmate in the supernal spheres, descended from its unattainable realms. In her attracting Advent's luminous wake, the white fire dragon bird of endless bliss, drifting with burning wings above her days. Heaven's tranquil shield guarded the mission child.
So I think we need to talk about this a little bit because it's quite a long passage. So Savitri, mother, remembers beauty that our lids who are claimed by death ignore. But she also wonders at this world of fragile forms that seem to be carried on canvas strips of shimmering time. Although the impunity of unborn mites was hers. So until Savitri came, no mournful line had barred this ray of her light. And on the frail breast of this precarious earth, what an incredible line. Yes, this earth is precarious, and its breast is not that strong, especially when man interferes with her. Since her orbed sight, her eyes in its house that is fastened by breath, opens in sympathy with happier stars, where life is not exposed to sorrowful change, then she remembers beauty that death-claimed lids ignore. And she wonders at this world of fragile forms, carried on canvas strips of shimmering time. But the impunity of unborn mites was hers. All that we have heard about and listened to mothers' cries of pain have nothing to do with the Divine Mother. They had to do with her working to transform the physical body. And she said if she could live to be 100, the change would occur. But when Dr. Bisht came to her, she asked him to speak to her about her body. And he said, "It's too old, Mother." And she realized that this particular body was too old for the full transformation. So part of her reason for leaving undoubtedly has to be with Earth's and humanity's unreceptivity. She leaned to bear the human load, no doubt, but her walk kept still the measures of the gods. When Mother walked, I remember in the playground once when she walked from her chair underneath the map and walked all the way out between the two doors. It was the most powerful experience when she looked at you. And her walk was so regal. Now, Earth's breath could not fail to stain Mother. She was not smeared with the dust of our mortal atmosphere because it still reflected heaven's spiritual joy. And it always reflected that. It never once, in all that she had to face in life, did it not reflect heaven's spiritual joy. But now we come to a passage that's very, very beautiful, and Sri Aurobindo and Amal have corresponded a bit on it. So can someone new read?
Almost they saw who lived within her light, her playmate in the sempiternal spheres, descended from its unattained realms, in her attracting advent's luminous wake. The white fire dragon bird of endless bliss, drifting with burning wings above her days. Heaven's tranquil shield guarded the mission child.
Okay, so we have a few things here that are most important. Sempiternal spheres, we see her playmate, and almost they saw who lived within her light. So most people did not see that. But when Amal asked Sri Aurobindo about this white fire dragon bird, he says, yes, and there are many, many other birds also. And he speaks of some of them. But this one is a special one. And Huta painted it after Mother did a sketch to show the white fire dragon bird drifting with burning wings above her days. Now, that was her playmate. And it was her playmate in the sempiternal spheres, and it descended from its unattainable realms. How could it descend from its unattainable realms? Well, that was a clear choice that it should be protecting the Divine Mother. And it was her playmate in the sempiternal spheres, but it descends into our human field because Savitri's luminous wake attracts her. And what is she but the white fire dragon bird of endless bliss? And it drifts above her days with burning wings. So heaven's tranquil shield guarded the mission child. Now we have to remember here that that Savitri is still very young. This is a flashback, and Sri Aurobindo is telling us about her, a little bit about her early days. But that's only a partial explanation, because he will in the next 4 lines he will tell us just a few things, and then he will take us into another area that is not too pleasant. So someone else please read those 4 lines.
A glowing orbit was her early term. Years like gold raiment of the gods that pass. Our youth sat throned in calm felicity, but joy cannot endure until the end.
You can read the next 2 lines.
There is a darkness in terrestrial things that will not suffer long to glad a note on her to close the inescapable hand. The armed immortal bore the snare of time.
Thank you. Well, even though Savitri's early term was a glowing orbit, and Mother tells us about her early days, and I'm sure that all of you have read about that, about when she was a child, even of 5 years old, and how she would rise up into the sky with this great robe that would enfold everyone on earth and bring a peace. So her youth sat throned. Throned here is very beautifully used, in calm felicity. But joy cannot endure until the end. Why is that? Well, Sri Aurobindo tells us there is a darkness in terrestrial things that will not allow long to glad a note. So it will not suffer that. And why does it not suffer that glad note? Because these dark forces are so powerful now on the earth. And we are experiencing them at this moment. And I'm going to read in a couple of weeks this passage of Mother about Japan, when this plague is killing hundreds of thousands of people, and what she goes through. But it's too long to speak of here. So then on Savitri, on her too closed the inescapable hand. The armed immortal bore the snare of time. Well, even the Divine Mother, having descended into a human form, had to bear the snare of time, because she had to work to change all of this earthly life to a life divine. But now Sri Aurobindo begins to tell us how this has happened to her. So can someone begin with one dealt with her?
One dealt with her who meets the burdened great, a signer of the ordeal and the path, who chooses in this holocaust of the soul death, fall, and sorrow as the Spirit's goads, the dubious Godhead, with his torch of pain, lit up the chasm of the unfinished world and called her to fill with her vast self the abyss.
Very good. Chasm, the H is not pronounced.
Okay.
Okay. Now, a signer of the ordeal and the path, who chooses in this holocaust of the soul death, fall, and sorrow, and now here's the key, as the Spirit's goads. If there was not this holocaust of the soul, if death was not there, fall and sorrow, we would not be pushed to evolve. So he's a dubious Godhead, no doubt, and he has his torch of pain that lights up this chasm, this abyss. So he uses chasm here, and then in the next line he uses abyss of the unfinished world, and called her to fill with her vast self the abyss. No one else could have done it but Sri Aurobindo and Mother, because even though the earth may not have been totally ready, there was enough of an opening for them to come down and take human form. And so they have had to bear, and Sri Aurobindo speaks of that. I think I talked to you once that they said, one of the correspondents wrote to him and says, well, what do you have to bear? You're the divine. You don't have to bear what we have to go through. And Sri Aurobindo writes and says to him that he has had to bear so much more than we've had to bear. And then he says, and the Mother 10 times that. So this dubious Godhead, he's dubious, doubtful, because he's not going to remain. But he has to push us ahead through the instruments of death and fall and sorrow so that we can move forward. But he calls Savitri and asks her to fill with her vast self the abyss. Someone else please read.
May I?
Surely.
August and pitiless in his calm outlook, heightening the eternal's dreadful strategy, he measured the difficulty with the might and dug more deep the gulf that all must cross.
Very good. We pronounce the word august.
August.
August, yes.
Thank you.
And pitiless, because he is pitiless in his calm outlook. And he's heightening, this Godhead is heightening the eternal's dreadful strategy. And what is that dreadful strategy? Well, it's the Holocaust that Sri Aurobindo mentions in this Holocaust of the soul. Because prior to the time in which we now live, there was no possibility of the challenge of the transformation of death into light. The great ones came, and we've read about them, and they disappeared. They left a name. and they bore the cross instead of the crown at the end, because most of them were killed. So this fellow is august and he's pitiless, but he's very calm in his outlook, in heightening the dreadful strategy of the eternal. But now we find that he measured the difficulty with the might. And this is an important line, because both Mother and Sri Aurobindo have told us that we are never given more than we can handle. That may seem to be incorrect, but we have to believe in them. I mean, to begin to think of the horrors of war and all that has happened, and the death of siblings. It's a difficult thing. We have to rise higher in our consciousness into the intuitive mind to understand it completely. So what happened? He measured the difficulty with the might and dug more deep the gulf that all must cross. So this dark night of the soul of St. John of the Cross and many others that have had to pass through, and I'm sure many of us also have to cross that deep gulf. But with Savitri, he, assailing her divinest elements, he makes her heart kin relative to our striving human heart, and forced her strength to its appointed road. Now, you see, the word appointed is so important here, because if there were no possibility of change, of release from death and sorrow, then why would the divine avatars have to come? So he forces her strength to its appointed road. Now, can someone else read who's not read before?
For this she had accepted mortal breath. To wrestle with the shadows she had come, and must confront the riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night.
So here we are. She has accepted this. She accepted mortal breath, and she accepted to wrestle with the shadow, and accepted to confront this riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb, silent matter's night. We'll end there today because we've covered a lot. Are there any questions? Anything at all?
It's not a question, but I do want to share. Last Sunday was my first class that I attended, and I felt something really beautiful. I read Savitri every day, but not like this. And that night I had a really beautiful dream. Of course, I didn't see everyone's face in the dream, but I dreamt that Mother was sitting on her chair, and we were all sitting around her at her feet, and we were reading Savitri to her.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, it was really, really beautiful. I think it was the passage we did last class that really moved something inside.
Well, I had mentioned that Amal had called it the ne plus ultra, something of which there is nothing higher. And I think you responded to that very powerfully.
Yes, it was beautiful. Thank you.
Would you like me to read everything, or shall we close for today?
Oh, please read. It would be nice to recapture everything, all these elements, all these verses into one vision.
Till then, no mournful line had barred this ray. On the frail breast of this precarious earth, since her orbed sight in its breath-fastened house, opening in sympathy with happier stars, where life is not exposed to sorrowful change, remembered beauty, death-claimed lids ignore, and wondered at this world of fragile forms, carried on canvas strips of shimmering time. The impunity of unborn mites was hers. Although she leaned to bear the human load, her walk kept still the measures of the gods. Earth's breath had failed to stain that brilliant glass. Unsmeared with the dust of our mortal atmosphere, it still reflected heaven's spiritual joy. Almost they saw, who lived within her light, her playmate in the sempiternal spheres, descended from its unattainable realms, in her attracting advent's luminous wake, the white-fired dragon bird of endless bliss, drifting with burning wings above her days. Heaven's tranquil shield guarded the missioned child. A glowing orbit was her early term, years like gold raiment of the gods that pass. Her youth sat throned in calm felicity. But joy cannot endure until the end. There is a darkness in terrestrial things that will not suffer too long, too glad a note. On her, too, closed the inescapable hand. The armed immortal bore the snare of time. One dealt with her who meets the burdened great, a signer of the ordeal and the path, who chooses in this holocaust of the soul death, fall, and sorrow as the spirit's goads. The dubious Godhead, with his torch of pain, lit up the chasm of the unfinished world and called her to fill with her vast self the abyss. August and pitiless in his calm outlook, heightening the Eternal's dreadful strategy, he measured the difficulty with the might and dug more deep the gulf that all must cross. Assailing her divinest elements, he made her heart kin to the striving human heart and forced her strength to its appointed road. For this, she had accepted mortal breath. To wrestle with the shadow, she had come, and must confront the riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night. Namaste all. Hope to see you next week.